When you think of Isaiah Thomas, you think of a player who had no business making it. He was 5'9" in a league built for giants, the last pick in the draft, and still he became a top 5 MVP finalist.
But his story wasn't just a feel-good underdog tale. It's one of heartbreak, betrayal, and a rise to the top that came crashing down just as fast. The craziest part about it all, the very team that built him up might have cost him everything.
One year he's the king of the fourth quarter, dropping 29 a night and leading the Celtics to the 1 seed. The next, he's out the rotation and on his way out of the league.
But how did we get here? All right. IT's story was never supposed to happen. Even before the NBA, Isaiah was fighting uphill battles. His dad, he didn't even want him playing basketball. He thought IT was too small, so he forced him to play against grown men, hoping to get him to quit.
But Dad's plan backfired. Instead of giving up, Isaiah got tougher. He dropped 30 a game in high school, became an all-conference star at Washington, yet still, he got picked dead last in the 2011 NBA draft.
60th pick was just a number. Every year I had to fight that battle of, okay, I'm better than this guy, and I'm going to show you.
Drafted dead last, the ultimate afterthought. And yet, by his third season, IT had already done the impossible. He became the shortest player in NBA history to average 20 and 6.
He also became the shortest player to put up a triple-double. And who the hell let his little ass get 10 rebounds?
I mean, none other than everybody's favorite, the Wizards, of course. Classic Wizards.
But that was IT. He was doing things no one his size had any business doing. Whether it was in Sac, where he and Boogie going crazy, or in Phoenix, where that backcourt made absolutely no sense, he kept proving people wrong.
And then Danny Ainge came calling to trade for Isaiah, and that's when things really took off.
The night he got traded from Phoenix to the Celtics, I texted him and I said, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to your basketball career.
While the offer was mostly right there, IT himself would probably beg to differ, but that wouldn't be obvious at first.
Because Isaiah got straight to it in Boston. Off the bench, he averaged 19 and 5, finished second in Sixth Man of the Year voting, and became an instant fan favorite. By the time the playoffs rolled around, he had the best showing of any Celtic in their playoff loss that year.
By his second season, IT wasn't just coming off the bench anymore. He was Brad Stevens' starting point guard. And what Brad did for Isaiah's career cannot be overstated.
Stevens didn't just make IT a starter. He made him the focal point of the Celtics offense. A 5'9" point guard running the show. You'd be hard-pressed to find another coach willing to do that.
Guess what? It worked. IT thrived under Brad's system, and Boston surrounded him with defenders and shooters to play to his strengths. Guys like Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, and Avery Bradley allowed Isaiah to shine.
That second season, Isaiah led the Celtics in both scoring and assists, earning his first All-Star nod and tying Calvin Murphy for the shortest All-Star in NBA history.
And when the playoffs rolled around, IT proved he wasn't just a regular season guy. Boston marched up against the 5th-seeded Hawks, and Isaiah went off. All right, in Game 3, he dropped a career-high 42 points to carry the Celtics to a win.
That Atlanta team was nice, too. That was the squad that ran off that season. Kyle Korver, Jeff Teague, when he was nice. Big Al. He followed that up with 28 in Game 4, tying the series at 2 apiece. And while Boston ultimately fell to Atlanta, Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens couldn't help but get excited by what they saw in Isaiah Thomas.
Absolutely, bro. I mean, that offseason, Brad, with that Jimmy Neutron-sized brain of his, started scheming like a mad scientist, okay? IT and Al Horford pick and rolls, unstoppable spacing, perfect defense. Just hide IT on the weak side behind Marcus Smart and Avery Bradley, and boom, he doesn't even have to guard anyone.
Real genius move right there. And it all worked. Brad gave Isaiah the keys to the offense, figured out how to hide him on defense, and the Celtics ran away with the East, the most balanced and dangerous team in the league. Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, Avery Bradley, all defensive-minded players already on the roster. But after Ainge brought in Al Horford, a whole new style was made possible.
You talk about Jimmy Neutron, that looks like a brain blast if I've ever seen one. But check it out. See, Isaiah Thomas made a career of doing stuff he had no business doing. And this 2016-17 season was full of those types of moments for IT, okay?
Blessing from God. I mean, you dream about things like that, especially playing for the Celtics, getting MVP chance, all the great players that did it before me. And I'm going to just keep going, and I can't say enough about my teammates and my coach for putting me in position to do the things that I do.
I mean, bro, I think he was averaging damn near 28 and 10 while being the focal point of that Celtics offense, bro. I mean, forget about being 5'9" for a second. He was doing things in the league that barely anybody was able to do, maybe one, two other players.
And the time he was doing it is even crazier. LeBron's running the league marching to the finals every year. Steph Curry's doing what he's doing out in the Bay. And then you got this 5'9" freak of nature hanging with all these decorated athletes. It was crazy. Just as seemingly everything was going right. The 29 a game, the one seed in the NBA, the shortest all NBA player in NBA history. The rug got pulled right from under IT.
One day before the playoffs, tragedy struck. Isaiah's sister, China, was killed in a car crash. It was devastating, and it hit Isaiah harder than anything he'd ever faced.
And yet, with tears in his eyes and his mind clearly somewhere else entirely, he still suited up for Boston. He carried that pain onto the court, and the team carried it with him.
Even in those first two games, where Boston fell behind 0-2, you could see him fighting through it. But when IT put his grief aside and locked in, the Celtics rallied behind him and never looked back.
Man, I still remember watching that. You could see it. Isaiah wasn't all there. I mean, how could he be? His sister had just passed, and somehow he still showed up to play.
Yeah, bro, I remember thinking, how is this dude even standing right now, let alone carrying his team? You could feel the weight of what he was doing going through every time he stepped out on the court.
And if that wasn't enough, in the second round, IT got his front tooth knocked out mid-series. He literally had to get surgery, and then he still suited up to play for Boston.
And guess what happened next? Stitches still sore, a 53-point masterpiece. 1 point shy of the highest playoff scoring performance in Celtics history, all right? And guess what? He did it on his sister's birthday. What IT was doing was already unreal, but now it had hit a whole new level. Against all odds, world crumbling everywhere but the court, and this man still finds a way to prevail.
But as legendary as that performance was, it came with a cost. Isaiah had been playing through pain for months, and by the time that Cavs series rolled around, his body, plain and simple, couldn't keep up. IT only managed to play 2 games against the Cleveland Cavs in the Eastern Conference Finals, and honestly, he didn't look like himself for either of them. The hip injury he'd been managing all season had finally caught up with him.
The Celtics shut him down, but by then, the damage was done. Isaiah's hip was in such a bad place that he could barely walk, and Boston's decision to let him keep playing through it to this point, that only made things worse.
The injury actually dated back to March, when Karl Anthony Towns fell on IT's back during a game against the
The
T-Wolves.
prime suspect.
Isaiah finished that game, but in the following months, his hip took repeated hits and never had time to heal.
IT consulted with team doctors and specialists, and instead of opting for surgery to fix the torn labrum, he was told to keep going. But every game pushed his body further past its limits.
By the time Boston finally shut him down during the Cavs series, Isaiah was barely holding it together physically, and instead of recommending surgery, the front office told him to rest and rehab over the summer.
And then, just a few months later, another bomb dropped right on 5'9" Isaiah Thomas's head.
Missed his call. Then he asked me how I was doing, and then it got a little quiet. He broke it to me. He's like, "Well, IT, I just traded you."
After everything Isaiah had given to Boston, his blood, sweat, tears, his literal hip, they sent him to Cleveland as part of a deal for Kyrie Irving.
And here's the kicker. When Cleveland's doctors took a look at IT, they immediately flagged his hip as a major issue. If the Cavs could see it after one physical, how did the Celtics miss it after being up close and personal for months?
It raises so many questions. Did Boston ignore the severity of this injury to keep him on the court? Did they downplay it just so they could trade him later? Either way, it felt like they used him, and when he was through, tossed him aside.
And just like that, Isaiah Thomas went from being king of the fourth quarter to being traded and doubted all over again. Because of his injury, IT missed the first few months of the Cavs season and came back as a shell of his former self. Ironically, a lot like the rest of that 2017 Cavs team.
This is like if you were a former All-Star in the home stretch of your career, like GM was bringing you in. D Rose, Dwayne Wade, they even had Big Perk out there in the cut. But just like all those guys we mentioned, IT was not what he once was. See, Isaiah's success was largely tied to skills that heavily relied on his quickness, and it was clear as day in any of his highlights. The hesitations, the quick first step, his injury zapped all that.
Without that burst of speed to create separation, he became ineffective. In that static ISO ball, hunt the mismatch Cavs offense, IT plain and simple did not fit. And the only thing worse was that he became the mismatch on the other end of the court.
I watched a ton of those games, and he easily was the worst defender in the NBA. And it soon turned IT into a bitter, frustrated player on a star studded team.
All-star players usually have a gradual decline to their primes, but because of the sudden trade and a roster that didn't match up with what he liked to do, IT's decline happened in the span of a few months. 1 minute he's dropping 50 to lead the Celtics to the conference finals, and a few months later he's struggling to see floor time with the Cavs.
And after all of 15 games until that Cleveland stint ran its course, IT became a hitchhiker. Cleveland to the Lakers, Lakers to Denver, Denver to Washington, Washington to New Orleans, and every stop, IT still fighting just to prove he belonged.
It's crazy to think. Just a year earlier, he was leading Boston to the #1 seed and calling for the Brinks truck. All right. Now he was bouncing from team to team on veteran minimum deals. He never regained the form he had with Boston and was never again the mighty IT. And honestly, the Celtics might be most at fault.
That's facts. They let him play with an injured hip for far too long. The initial injury likely happened in December of 2016, but instead of addressing the real problem, Celtics doctors called it a groin injury and shot him up with a PRP injection. In March, after Cat fell on Isaiah and his hip continued to get worse, did Boston shut him down? No. They kept feeding him painkillers to keep him on the court while that injury just kept getting worse.
And when the offseason came, Boston told him to rehab and rest instead of opting for surgery. Then, months later, they traded him to Cleveland and let the Cavs deal with it.
The timing feels at best shady. I mean, Boston clearly knew how bad the hip was, but instead of protecting their player, used him and shipped him out.
And it probably cost IT more than just his All NBA status. All right. Between his injury and how it was handled, Isaiah likely lost over $100 million in potential earnings. All right. Boston eventually fired their head trainer and medical staff.
Why? The team parted ways with both their head trainer and their strength and conditioning coach.
It was a weird situation. Nobody knew why it happened. Nobody knew why it happened. I'm not going to say it, though.
But by that time, the damage to IT's hip was done. IT was not the same, and his career never fully recovered.
And even after everything, the injuries, the trades, and being counted out by the league, Isaiah Thomas is still out here hooping. He's played in the G League, dropped 81 points in a Pro-Am.
But man, you can't help but ask, what if? What if Boston had handled things differently? What if they'd prioritized his health instead of pushing him through the pain?
What if the Celtics had shut him down when the injury first happened? What if they hadn't traded him after everything he sacrificed for that team? Through all of that, Isaiah Thomas never stopped fighting. All right, he's still out there proving that he belongs, reminding everyone why he's one of the greatest underdog stories in NBA history.
And speaking of greatness, if you want to dominate like Isaiah Thomas, you need the best basketball in the game. That's where Baden Sports comes into play.
That's right. The official high school basketball at Texas, Washington, Hawaii, and several other states. Baden, they've got balls, all right? Whatever you need, they got it. Ty, why don't you let them know where to get that discount at?
That's easy. At badensports.com, make sure you guys are plugging in that promo code hoop_plug_ for 10% off.
Yes, sir. And as always, thank y'all for rocking with us. Put some flavor in your ear.
Peace.